Marble Madness. You know that quirky race through the maze NES game you likely just rented when you were a kid, but still managed to roll its way into your heart, was just one of many console ports of the original 1984 arcade classic created by Atari. Unique visuals and controls along with groundbreaking music and sound deemed this title a notable historical video game even to this day. This deep dive will of course share a detailed account of its development history, intriguing secrets, and a few challenging strategies to help you beat Marble Madness. We will also reveal its unreleased sequel along with small tie-ins to some of your favorite 80s board games and even the king of pop, Michael Jackson. Now let's get started. And if this is your first time here at the channel, my name is Tyler, and if you love gaming from all generations like we do here at G3, then consider hitting that subscribe button and hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss anything. The 1983 video game crash undoubtedly had Atari back on its heels. Perhaps the current style of arcade games had begun to become stale, and with the 2600's home console ET debacle, Atari desperately needed a win. Atari was ready for some fresh ideas to catch gamers' eyes and possibly earn back their trust to spend their hard-earned money on their video games. Atari encouraged new games that provide a unique controlling experience along with simultaneous two-player gameplay. The concepts for what would become Marble Madness were actually presented by a fresh face at Atari, 18-year-old video game designer Mark Cerny. Marble Madness was one of his first major projects, playing a key role into launching his illustrious career in the gaming industry, playing huge roles in some of our favorite all-time classics, such as Sonic the Hedgehog 2, Spyro the Dragon, and Crash Bandicoot. The game's premise revolves around guiding a marble through a series of obstacle-laden courses, aiming to reach the finish line before the timer runs out. Ideas for a miniature golf game were initially considered, but ultimately scrapped. However, the final product is a combination of a miniature golf vibe and a maze-based board game such as Labyrinth. Cerny's designs for his mazes were inspired by the artistic works of M.C. Escher, with an isometric perspective similar to other popular arcade titles like Zaxxon, Q*bert, and Congo Bongo. The minimalist design was a somewhat forced choice by Cerny due to hardware limitations. He considered the gameplay paramount, so the focus on physics during programming was critical for Marble Madness, to allow for proper response of the marble to gravity and momentum, with the implementation of a trackball for controls, with a standard trackball being utilized after the initial motorized trackball that Cerny envisioned was both physically and technologically a little too ambitious. Cerny partnered with programmer Bob Flanagan, who had been collaborating the previous 10 months on an ultimately cancelled arcade title for Michael Jackson's Thriller. Now that is a game I wish would have came to fruition. Perhaps a future video on that if I can recover any details regarding its history. Moving on. Flanagan was also responsible for the game's attract mode, collision detection, animations, and most importantly, physics. Cerny and Flanagan would continue to troubleshoot with these new tools at their disposal and walk that fine line between aesthetically pleasing visuals, reasonable physics, and engaging gameplay to allow for the best gaming experience within their technological limitations. Marble Madness was the first game to use the Atari System 1 hardware and had to be programmed in the C programming language. The final product consisted of only 6 levels with ramped up difficulty to compensate for the game's short length. Music and sound for Marble Madness was tasked to Brad Fuller, Hal Cannon, and Earl Vickers, with Marble Madness being one of the first to use true stereo sound. It was the first arcade game to use an FM sound chip which was provided by Yamaha. This allowed the music to synchronize with the game as you progress through each level, contributing to a more immersive experience. In 1989, the NES version of Marble Madness was released, developed by Rare and published by Milton Bradley. While the original arcade hardware utilized a Motorola CPU and advanced graphics for the time, the NES port had to squeeze all that magic into an 8-bit console. Rare already had a few popular NES titles under their belt at this point, like Wizards and Warriors, WWF's WrestleMania, and of course RC Pro-Am. Paul Proctor and Rachel Edwards were the lead developers for Marble Madness on the NES. You can find their names in the leaderboard for the game, and this duo was also responsible for other rare titles such as the recently mentioned Wizards and Warriors, as well as another Milton Bradley offering, California Games. A quick side note here on the artwork for the NES Marble Madness. This box was visually enticing on a store or rental shelf with the imagery of bright colors and motion. I also don't think it's a coincidence that the font used is remarkably similar to an iconic Milton Bradley board game from the 80s called Fireball Island, which also seems like a callback to the Indiana Jones theming. The NES version adapted the 6 original levels named accordingly: the Practice, Beginner, Intermediate, Aerial, Silly, and Ultimate Races, keeping the core gameplay intact. However, compromises had to be made. For instance, the NES struggled with smooth isometric rendering, and the controls weren't as precise without the arcade's trackball. But in my opinion, the graphical representation of the NES game is impressive, because I feel the visuals are not that degraded compared to the arcade. The NES port allowed for 90 versus 45 degree options similar to a Kubert style of gameplay, although I personally prefer the 90 degree. The NES game also includes hitting the A button for supercharged movements, since you couldn't change intensity of the speed of directional guidance like the trackball. If you want more of an arcade experience on your home console, then an NES Advantage or Max controller are reasonable options. Now, I personally never had the opportunity to play on a true Marble Madness arcade cabinet, but a MAME-style trackball playthrough made me feel like I was pawing at the trackball like a catnip-crazed feline instead of playing a video game, so I'm happy with my NES D-pad any day. The music is the true star of Marble Madness and dictates both the fun and dramatic tension of the gameplay. Composed for the NES by Rare's in-house composer David Wise, who kept the music remarkably true to the original in chiptune form. The Genesis version is the closest to the arcade as far as sound on a home console, because the original has that tinny synthesizer quality we have come to recognize as that 16-bit Genesis sound. My personal take on Marble Madness is that it is best described as a nearly perfect rentable NES title. Intuitive gameplay with no definitive need for an instruction manual, great visuals and animations like a catapult, engaging music, and 2-player availability if you were playing with friends. It's definitely a game that you can beat in a day or two if you stayed persistent. The game is just pure fun, except for why do those vacuums look like that little Steven dog meme I think it's called? I mean, for real, I can't unsee it now. But as far as secrets and tricks for Marble Madness, there are some speedrunning advanced techniques I've discovered researching this video that are remarkably impressive. However, I am a mere mortal and am not going to insult your intelligence or any speedrunner's skills by saying I am proficient in these skills. But a few I would like to work on perfecting are: number 1, the hot drop on the intermediate level, which guides you off the rolling green carpet, blindly I might add, to drop you onto the finish line. Number 2, the silly spin shortcut on the silly race. And number 3, the pause buffer strategy, notably on the ultimate race to skip time cycles, allowing for faster times across the bridge by precisely timing pausing and unpausing the game. Let me know if you have mastered any of these techniques and can provide us some pointers in the comments. Marble Madness wasn't just a game, it was a phenomenon. It inspired sequels, spiritual successors, and even influenced game design in titles like Super Monkey Ball and Marble Blast Ultra. Although a direct sequel, Marble Madness 2, was planned, it never made it past the prototype stage, because it would be released around the same era as the popular fighting games like Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat, and just felt this game could not keep up. But luckily, there is a ROM out there somewhere now if you want to experience it yourself. Today, Marble Madness lives on in the retro gaming community, cherished for its creativity and challenge. From casual players reliving their childhood to speedrunners mastering its intricacies, the game remains a staple of gaming history. Special shout out to Rafael Martinez for finding Mullet Boy first in our last most influential video game commercials video. Till next time guys, G3 out.